You know, every single day, pretty much, there is a poll asking if there was a general election tomorrow, who would you vote for? I maintain I've never been polled in all my life. That has not changed recently, but notwithstanding that, these polls are coming in thick and fast. There is not a general election tomorrow, so I always take these with a pinch of salt, but it's getting to the point now where I cannot ignore the obvious, because Alex Dean, when you look across the spectrum at the different polls and who's conducting them, there does seem to be a common message, which is at a general election, the Tories would take quite a kicking and it would be Labour that would prosper. So I'm asking tonight a simple question. Do you think that the Labour Party is what we need to make Britain great again?
I certainly don't, and I can explain why. But let me just say a word on polling first. When you look at the data in the polls, and it's clear, as you say, that Labour has a lead in poll of polls or across the data that you can see. But that lead isn't drawn from some enormous groundswell of new support for the Labour Party. It comes from a very large growth in the number of people who say they don't know how they're going to vote at the next election, who are then discounted from final figures saying what the final result should be. And people who say they don't know how they're going to vote are wildly disproportionately taken from those who voted Conservative in 2019. That is to say that the challenge for the Tory party is to get out its vote and to convince people that supported it last time that they should do so again. That's hard, but it's identifiable and it's doable.
Is it doable, do you think? So basically what Alex is saying, and I'll paraphrase, correct me if I'm wrong, but basically a lot of it is to do with anomalies in the polls, and actually the Tories perhaps wouldn't be as battered as some are saying that they would be.
Well, I think the poll indicating 90 Conservative seats is probably very unlikely. I think worst case for the Conservatives is probably 150 seats, something like 1997, which is obviously still very bad. And it's important to say a majority of one for Labour would be extraordinary given where they ended up in 2019. Going back to your question about would a Labour government be good for the UK, I think a Labour government would be less bad for the UK than the Conservatives. Now, I understand that's not a ringing endorsement. That might not get people, running to the ballot box in May 2024, perhaps. And that's probably what the Conservatives are banking on. There is not this enthusiasm and energy behind Keir Starmer. But I have to say, I feel sorry for Conservative voters because it feels like they're being permanently gaslit by their own party. Boris Johnson funds LTNs. Now Rishi Sunak's looking into them. In 2019, they commit to net zero by 2050. Now they say they hate net zero. They said they'd get immigration down to the tens of thousands in 2010. Now it's net immigration 600,000 over the last 12 months. So on issue after issue, they create bogeymen. They say we have to do something about this. They're the ones responsible.
Yeah, but there's been a massive issue in between, which is called the global pandemic, which has altered the landscape hugely in various different places.
Well, I just think, and look, it's partly a function of being in power for so long, but I just think people aren't going to take them very seriously if they keep on doing this on immigration, on net zero, on LTNs. Look, it was their idea to have this prohibition on new petrol cars not being sold after 2030. That came from them. And now they're rallying against it. ULEZ. Initially proposed by Boris Johnson as London Mayor. Now they're making it this huge totemic issue because it's going to give them political capital.
Maybe it's called listening to the electorate. Maybe
that's one read on it.
Yeah.
There's a lot of issues that Aaron's just mentioned, and I don't want to disappear down one particular rabbit hole. But LTNs, when they were first mooted, were actually quite an empowering thing for local government, which is something I happen to believe in. I think we should give more authority at a lower level. I don't mean to sound hierarchical. At a local level, where people can make more decisions about how their lives are run. Sadly, it seemed in a lot of the examples, and I've just moved into Dulwich, which is crippled by LTNs. People are having to endure LTNs which aren't working. But on your thing about ULEZ, the ultra-low emission zones, which we're now seeing in a number of different cities, the ULEZ, as originally conceived for London, was really kind of central. It was like Monopoly Board or less. It was really quite central around it. The expansion so quickly out into the outer boroughs, I mean, I would think most people on the real left wouldn't like it, because the people it punishes the most are people who haven't bought a vehicle in a while, ultra-dependent on their vehicle for work, like going to the airport or doing things out of hours, the tradesmen and so forth, and cannot afford to trade up. So those people used to be core Labour voters. And the idea that you should kind of laugh it off when those are the people who suffer... No, I wasn't saying you were. The idea that the Sadiq Khan should say, oh, well, then, it's only 1 in 10 vehicles, so forget about it. When that 1 in 10 is really drawn from people who can least afford to lose those
shift workers that span different days, for example, they'll get hammering. You mentioned mentioned 2019. Some would say that actually one of the key differences between then and going forward would be the fact that Jeremy Corbyn is no longer the leader and instead being replaced by Keir Starmer. Do you think that Starmer would fare better? I mean, it's not, I was going to say fare better than Corbyn did, but I don't really think that's going to be very hard. But do you think that they're going to be better placed with Starmer as their leader?
Well, it'll be an interesting challenge if Keir Starmer can clear 40%, which is what Labour gets in 2017. I mean, if he doesn't, that is a failure, because a lot of people, like myself, can point the finger and say, well, actually, Jeremy Corbyn did better than you. I think on present trajectories, and again, it's a year away at least, he probably will clear 40%. I think, look, this is my suspicion, I think Labour get a healthy majority, and I think Keir Starmer won't do very much. He'll be very poor in the execution, and he'll become incredibly disliked very quickly. A bit like François Hollande in France after, the early 2010s. That's my read on things. And I think if you're an ambitious Conservative, that's what you're going to work with, rather than, oh, well, we can win next year because actually, we've got all the answers. Like I say, I think they've been so bad to their own electorate, their own base, for so long. I just think too many people are switching off.
So one of the things to say is to go to your first point, Michelle, about polls. The next election is a year away, and a lot can change in that time. The real poll that matters is when people go to vote. And of course, Thatcher famously in the 1980s, mid-term, was always miles behind in the polls, like much worse, even than this on some occasions, but really far behind. And would say, how far are we? Not far enough. We've got to keep going and convince people we're doing things in office. I also think what Aaron was saying, the comparison to 2019 is interesting. Because of the global pandemic, because of the invasion of Ukraine, because of the financial events we've seen around the world, people sometimes lose sight of how transformative a period this is politically, domestically in the UK. The big defining features of the last election were Boris, Brexit and Jeremy Corbyn, whatever you think of those. And net, they were all in favour of the Conservative Party. They encouraged people to vote Tory. And none of those are going to apply next time. You might argue, let's really finish off Brexit, might be there a bit. But the other two are obviously unambiguously gone, right? So it's very unusual to have a single parliament in which all the leitmotifs, all the main themes that dominate an election have changed completely by the time of the next one.
And I do think, actually, that I think the Corbyn, you'll probably disagree with me, but I think the Corbyn element did drive a lot of people that perhaps were not traditional Tories to the Tories in 2019. Do you think that's fair?
No, I think that, look, Corbynism in many ways was a failure. I saw a great article recently by a lady who used to work at The Economist, Anne McElvoy, and she said, Corbyn is like Farage. I said to myself, if only. Yeah. If only Jeremy Corbyn could do rebuttal and agenda setting like Nigel Farage, he'd be the Prime Minister. So I think there were lots of strengths, actually, with Corbynism. Its policy agenda on public ownership, a narrative potentially on reconstructing, rebuilding a nation, a national community. It couldn't do that for a bunch of reasons, many self-inflicted. And so I think the comparative advantages were never really jumped upon. But I think the core policies of rebuilding this country, making it a better place to live for everyone, I still think that's a very powerful one. And I frankly don't think that Starmer's going to build on that. I think Starmer is very much in the pocket of big business. He's talking about his dad being a tool maker and all these things. I don't want to hear your story, your hard luck story. I want to hear the story you're saying about the country. And, it's a shame, but I still think there's an appetite for that stuff.
I had no idea his dad was a toolmaker. Someone should have mentioned that at some point. Look, of course, the Corbyn legacy is one that split his party, not least. And whatever you think, whether the anti-Semitism allegations are fair or unfair, Starmer has had to spend a good deal of time putting the house in order. And plainly, it's obvious the Jewish community felt that there was an element of anti-Semitism, rightly or wrongly, in the Labour Party as it was under Corbyn. And Starmer's had to do a good deal of repair to that relationship. Because that's one thing that unambiguously happened at the last election. That people, the Jewish community would once have been split in the way that it votes much more than it was in 2019 against the Labour Party under Corbyn. I just wanted to make a different point there, because I'm quite conscious we haven't answered your exam question as to whether or not the Labour Party would be better for Britain, or at least I haven't. I unambiguously think that it would be bad for the country. I am as sure as Wednesday follows Tuesday that a Britain governed by Keir Starmer and co would be worse for Britain, even on the criticisms that Aaron makes, even if I conceded all of those. Not least because, to my mind, Blair was a centrist by inclination. Starmer is currently a bit of a centrist this because you can see he's been told to be, he needs to be in order to win the election. It's not in his DNA, it's not in his core instincts. He's actually, I think, quite a bit more left-wing than his current persona suggests.
But I mean, I'll be interested to see the turnout at the next general election, because I think people, I'm trying to kill a fly there in case you're wondering what I was just doing with that.
I know,
I was trying to be really discreet and then I realised that my hand was on the screen, so I don't have a nervous twitch. There was just a fly that landed and I was trying to get it and I failed. Anyway, it'll be interesting to see the turnout at the next general election.
Don't knows equals don't turn out and don't vote, and the turnout is the biggest threat to the Conservative Party in the next election.
I say this all the time, people get really angry with me. They don't think I should be in a position where I'm saying this, but I'm not sure that if there was a general election tomorrow, I wouldn't turn out to vote.
I completely disagree with that. No matter,
lots of people do. They'll be getting in touch and telling me off.
No matter which way you vote, you should vote. And if you really feel like you cannot vote for any of the answers on the ballot paper, at least register your discontent and spoil your ballot. You will at least have shown that you are there.
They don't care. Well, they don't sit there and go, I've had 1,000 penises drawn on this, so I better up my game.
They don't care if there's 10. They don't care if there's 100. But if over time there's 1,000 votes in every constituency where people are spoiling their ballots, people will sense there's room in the political spectrum for a different appetite. That's what I mean. I give an unpopular opinion. I'm quite a good deal more sympathetic to the Australian position of compulsory voting than most people, but only if you can say none of the above.
Yeah, see, we have...
We agree on that. There you go.
There you go. We managed to find a point of agreement between these two before we got to the end. I haven't got time to register my frustration with that. I just... you'd have to drag me there by my fingertips, I think, if you tried to enforce compulsory voting. Do you reckon that is, though, the answer? And by the way, what a sorry state of affairs within politics if the only way that you can get people to engage with you as a politician is by forcing them to do so. I think MPs need to have a long, hard look in the mirror and ask themselves, why would so many people perhaps not turn out at the next election?